This is a reading from the Autobiography of Maria Valtorta. That was my mother's work. I was sacrificed, and he was ruined. In the evening I had a very high fever. All the guests complimented me on the magnificent color I had that night. I should say so. They composed dithyrambs on my shining eyes with which I gazed at them. They certainly were shining. The fever made them phosphorescent, and they asked me if it resulted from news of the imminent arrival of my fiancé. Without wanting to, people are sometimes cruel to their fellows. Those worthy persons with their compliments and their questions and delusions were cruel, but they knew nothing and were thus not to blame. They were like children, speaking without realizing. I wanted to write Mario and his grandmother at once, but Clotilde and her husband said, "Wait. It must be a moment of bewilderment. Wait." I waited. I did not write to him any more, though. I wept, prayed, and forgave. I forgave him, understanding the drama he was going through, and I forgave Mother, seeing that she was the author of that drama. I have always forgiven the harm received with respect to myself, you can be assured. In January I caught Spanish influenza again. It was that last terrible epidemic of Spanish flu in which Benedict XV lost his life. My cousin Normanna, the one at the Villa Hotel, also died, leaving 4 orphans, the youngest of whom was 7 months old. Those children kept me from feeling the new double stab too harshly. I had to take care of them for a while, and that kept me going. When I have a mission, I plunge into it with such ardor that everything else becomes less important to my heart. And then I hoped and hoped. I could not resign myself to the idea that Mario, who had placed such trust in me and had been so faithful, had suddenly become unfaithful and distrustful. I excused him, for I thought heaven only knew what my mother had said to him to separate him from me. But I could not get over his having been able to believe that lie he had undoubtedly been told, and I hoped that after the initial period of rage, he would be capable of grasping the trap. I waited until May. 6 months are sufficient to reason and reach the light, see things as they are, and they are also sufficient to exhaust a whim. Certain loves based on vice last only briefly. In the last letter I had written to him, which he should have received around Christmas, in addition to sending my best wishes, I exhorted him not to make me repent of having had faith in him and having entrusted and donated my heart to him. I recall that I wrote the following sentences, virtually dictated by an all-seeing spirit. You know what an effort I have had to make to enable this love of ours to have life. Never forget it. I am not telling you to live as I, who am a woman, your woman, should. I have enough sense to realize that it would be impossible. And since I don't want to force you to say things that are not true, I'm not asking you to give me your word of honor that you are living as those consecrated in a cloister must live. No, you must never be insincere with me, as I will never be with you. I could forgive you for anything, remember that, except a lack of trust in me. That would show me that you do not yet know me and do not love me completely. For if you loved and knew me completely, you would realize as well that my love for you is so complete and perfect that it combines in itself the characteristics of the love of a mother, sister, and friend, in addition to wife's. And you know that a true mother forgives everything, a true sister is indulgent in everything, and a true friend understands everything. Don't ever cause me the offense of being insincere and distrustful with me. I love your heart even more than your body, you know, and your heart must not have secrets for me. Try to live in such a way that confiding in Maria will not prove hard for you. You are living in a city where all the most insidious dangers are assembled and condensed to lay traps for a man, especially if he's young. But always manage to free yourself from all the tentacles of a pleasure, capable of making you its slave, to the point of dragging you down into the mud. You would be too ashamed afterwards, not on my account, but on your own, for the sake of your dignity as a man. Always be a man, Mario, and not just a male. Know how to remain free and strong, to stand tall, even in the midst of all the siren songs tempting the male soul in 1,000 ways. You will, won't you? For yourself, for your career, and for me, whose good hope in life you are. But if by some unacceptable chance you should already have succumbed, oh, come to me then, come to me more than before. We shall weep together, and I'll heal you and bring you back to life once again, free and strong, for a woman's heart, when truly loving, contains within it all the medicines to cure you of the illnesses of the flesh, and all the indulgences to absolve you of the weaknesses of the spirit. You will ask, how can you manage to remember after so many years what you wrote to him then? Oh, I remember. In the general collapse of my body, my memory alone remains strong. I remember everything, even the most insignificant things. Could I fail to recall what I have repeated interiorly in thought thousands of times? I could repeat to you all the letters I have written. They are engraved on my mind as if it were a phonograph record, just as his letters are engraved on my heart. I keep them beside my bed, but do not even look at them. I have no need. They are all written on my heart, and I have only to look inside myself to read them. After 6 months of silence as regarded Mario, I wrote to his grandmother to tell her all that had befallen, and closed as follows. For the sake of my dignity, I now find it is well and good to put an end to this unfortunate love. I do not judge or condemn Mario. I regret only that his fine youth should thus be degraded in an unworthy liaison. But that's the way it is. As long as Mario was a boy, he was perfect. Having become a man, he has followed the path of all, a sad path which is the source of so many errors. May God forgive him, as I do. Let him know that I give back his pledge, which he moreover has so miserably gone back on, and that if he was not able to be faithful, I will be for him and for myself. And if I cannot take care of him as a creature of flesh, I will do so in regard to him as a soul, praying for his welfare, for in spite of everything, though giving him back his full liberty, I shall continue to consider myself his faithful wife. Father, I told you that when Roberto was taken from me, I thought no one could suffer more, but in 1921, I suffered much more. From that morning of December 24th, 1921 until when? For as long as I live, I shall bear this pain driven into my heart, and it is such a pain that it withstands and subsists even amidst the joy of my devotion to God. How I understand Christ's sorrow over the betrayal of the unfaithful apostle. No, there is nothing which surpasses the pain a betrayal gives us, the betrayal of one we loved and esteemed. Death's taking from us someone we have loved is nothing in comparison to this evil action, which lowers the esteem we have until then had for a dear person and hurls it to the ground, to be shattered in the mire, the very gift of our heart, which is scorned and betrayed. It is a pain which squeezes blood from our fibers and grinds us as a millstone does. It annihilates us. We can follow someone who dies into the realms of the afterlife by way of thought. The one dying does not abandon us. From other domains he watches over, follows, and protects us, and his spirit, free from the constrictions of the flesh, can still come near us like a guardian angel. But one who betrays us is lost for us. He himself withdraws, bearing his heart, which became a chalice of bitterness for us, with him. He goes off with an insult, trampling on our heart, which under his feet vainly attempts a final plea for mercy. Lost forever is he who inflicts the torture and offending slap of a betrayal, and undeserved abandonment on our trust, our esteem, and our love. He who dies does not cease to love us, but rather loves us with greater perfection from the other life. Our love continues with the deceased loved one, but he who betrays no longer loves us. He goes off with his whole self, and we remain alone to love him. For it seems impossible, but it's true. We love nothing so perfectly and intensely as we love him who has betrayed us, with a love made of compassion. He remains fixed in our heart. Upon him we see the guilt of his betrayal wounding us so deeply. But we are not grieved over our wound, but over the wound he has inflicted on himself, impairing himself in his honesty as a man. We grieve over his future remorse, which will inevitably rise when the soul, cleared of the caprice which has seduced it, in hours of meditation, experienced by even the most superficial, finds itself face to face with itself and its past. As I state, Mario has the significant extenuating circumstance of what my mother wrote to him, but if it mitigates his guilt, it does not annul it, for the betrayal remains, as does the offense he caused me in preferring a creature of vice, encountered by chance on the sidewalks of a cosmopolitan city to me, his faithful and honest woman. If he had come back to me after a brief fling, I would have made allowances for him. But that way, it is a bitterness which remains intense and will remain until the tomb. And yet, it did not extinguish my love for him, nor do I feel this involves a diminishment of my devotion to God. As widows can enter monasteries and honor God with all the practices of a monastic life, and with a love which, having been formed for the creature, becomes perfect in donating itself to the Creator, so I, a poor widow, before becoming a wife, can love my God, who alone has remained to reign over and in me, and at the same time conserve a supernatural love for the soul of him who left me and fell so low after so much good I had sown therein. Don't you think I may do so? My new sorrow did not detach me from God. Rather, it was an increase in love for him. I experienced none of those tremendous hours of rebellion undergone in 1914 and the following years. I suffered unsurpassably. Oh yes, now I can say so clearly, now that I have experienced all sorrows except that of the death of a son. I suffered, but not one of my tears fell to the ground alone. After having burned my heart, I poured them all into the heart of Christ. Towards Easter, in the Church of the Purification, which was the parish for the hotel where I was, the parish priest exhorted the faithful to join the Franciscan Third Order. St. Francis and I were old acquaintances. At my school, in the spring of 1912, my superior, aware of my enthusiasm for this saint, whose praises were not very loudly sung at that time, had given me a book on him to read, The Love That Inspires, if I remember the title correctly. No one wanted to be the first to read it, not even the sisters. The superior brought it to me, saying, Take this, Valtortino, since you're a little Franciscan. Read it, and let me know if it might be to the others' liking to have it read in the refectory. It was a new book, with the pages still to be cut. I plunged into that reading, and if at first I loved the seraphic Father by instinct, I afterwards loved him 3 times as much with knowledge. I had found my saint, and even in the black times of my youth, my affection for him did not slacken. It was more than natural that, having returned to God with my whole will, I should now, more than ever, feel led towards his herald, the stigmatized one of Verna, who, after having been flesh, out of love for Christ, was able to become spirit. I was on the verge of immediately joining the Franciscan Third Order, but I refrained. Why? Because a remnant of shame was still in me. I now trusted in and entrusted myself to the mercy of God, and in God increasingly found the comfort I had uselessly sought to find in all human beings. But I had not yet reached the point of believing, as I do now, that God's mercy is so boundless that nothing is an obstacle to it in loving his creatures. I told myself, yes, God has forgiven you and loves you as before, but you, my soul, should not forget what you have done contrary to the divine law. Therefore, before entering a militia such as the Third Order, you must undergo your purgatory, a purgatory of penance, a purgatory of study to purify yourself and grow in the knowledge of your duties as a Christian. You have been infected for many years and are now in quarantine. As long as I told myself I should remember my mistakes, it was fine. I always remember them, even now, to spur myself increasingly to feel gratitude towards God, who was so merciful to me, and to feel ever more the need to cancel my debt to divine justice through a continual offer of holocausts. Where I erred was in waiting to enter. Restrained by a remnant of shame that was not holy, I judged God according to a human vision, and behaved towards him as I would have with a fellow creature whom I had offended. I did not yet have a proper vision. The good Jesus had already taken me by the hand, as with the blind man of Bethsaida, and had led me out of the crowd. He had then placed saliva on my eyes and imposed his hands, and I was beginning to see. But as a final deceit of the evil one, I viewed my whole past fearfully enlarged, and just as men looked like big trees to the blind man of the gospel, so my faults, which undeniably were such, appeared so monstrous that they had me fear entering among the followers of Christ under the seal of a Third Order. The second laying on of the divine hands was still needed in order for me to see everything clearly. I thus said to myself, imagine yourself as a postulant. Observe whether you are capable of following the Master under a special rule, or must be satisfied with being a simple believer. In divine and human matters, I have always considered carefully whether I could bring them to a conclusion. I never started off, and do not now, at a gallop, like so many under the spur of a sudden enthusiasm, which, even if given by a holy inspiration, does not last unless fortified by many others. I have always preferred a constant trot, carrying one far to rearing up and galloping, which are soon exhausted. In place of the very swift dash of an Olympic champion, I have always preferred the measured steps of our mountain dwellers, for example, who seem to go so slowly, but methodically cover distances which no champion could, and overcome all obstacles with a calm I would term almost solemn. Method and order are needed in all things, along with reflection, to more closely resemble God, who, in spite of his boundless power, was methodical and orderly in creating, and only exceptionally violates his order, either to punish us by stirring up cosmic forces, or to convince us of his existence by working a miracle. And reflection is needed, first, to undertake a work so as not to cause people to laugh afterwards at our presumption, which goes limp like a pierced blister at the first setback it encounters. I thus imposed a waiting period on myself, and in the meantime I tried to reclaim the soil of my soul to prepare it for the divine seed. Away with the stones, that is, the feeling of resentment towards those who had most harmed me. God cannot reign where even a minuscule hatred reigns, for charity and hatred cannot lodge under the same roof. Therefore, first of all, I have removed this from my heart, forgiving the two people to blame, my mother, guilty of lying and selfishness, and Mario, guilty of a lack of reflection and betrayal. Next, the birds of the air, that is, the different thoughts making our mind flutter here and there, scattering the seed outside the furrow, when they do not destroy it outright, by swallowing up the divine inspirations in their gizzards, eager for base human food. Then I eliminated the passers-by who might trample on my seed, that is, the affections which were not contained in the middle of the way or in the seeded clods of earth, loving everyone with an intense spiritual affection for the sake of their souls, and without human attachment concerned with what is fleeting and fostered by human sympathies. The fourth thing to be removed was the thorns, that is, human preoccupations over what might still happen to me, the sad future presenting itself, and so on. I won't say it was quick work, but to reclaim land as well, years and years are needed. Afterwards, though, it yields 100-fold, for, rich in virgin humors and cleared of all imperfections, it provides abundant harvests. When my soul, cleared by my assiduous toil of all stones, thorns, and stagnant waters, well irrigated by love, but not subject to the overflowing of passions, fertilized by pain and charity, plowed by contrition, and softened by trust, was ready, the divine sower came, and everything blossomed in Christ, a flowering which has never ceased, but rather has continually intensified its blooming, increasing with ever new steels, for from the first sowings of the virtues commanded, we passed on to those of the gospel counsels, and from these to the holy boldness of love, to the thirst for suffering, to asking to become a holocaust. I say we passed, because in the divine betrothal to Christ, my soul was no longer alone in asking, and Christ was no longer alone in sowing, but there were two of us, two wills, two loves, two hearts wanting ever new flowers, working to attain increasingly select blossomings, and each of us, if pausing for a moment, was urged by the other to continue. I said that the point was reached of sowing the request to become a holocaust as the supreme flower. No, after this the flower of flowers was also bloomed in my heart, the flower whose seed, to grow and blossom eternally, needs to be fertilized by complete sacrifice. Christ was born in me. From the distant that is in time, annunciation of Christ to my heart, after the dark period of pains laden with all the weight of humanity, Christ had been born anew, and covered the native sod with his lush growth. My poor soul, which is nothing, but whose only reason for existence is to be a pedestal for its Lord. Maria has disappeared. He alone lives. Maria is dying. He breathes in life from her to blossom ever more beautifully in her. In a short time, Maria will be nothing but a memory among men. But he will bear my soul to his lovely heavenly garden, and I shall go on blooming eternally, under the divine rays of the Holy Trinity, caressed by the hand of Mary. This is Maria Valtorta at age 25. On the back of the photograph, the following handwritten dedication can be read. Your daughter Maria sends this with gratitude and blessing to you, dear parents, from whom she received joys and comforts along with life itself, on the 21st anniversary of her birth, Reggio, March 14th, 1922. In one of his tragedies, Goethe writes, "Let duty be active where love is inert." The time had come for me to act according to Goethe's counsels. When she was convinced that Mario had been vanquished forever, God knows by what weapons, Mother began to call me back home insistently. You will understand that I was useful. I worked like the most industrious of maids, and except for food, cost nothing. Except for food, for I had always been indifferent to fashions and coquetry of any kind, which cost the members of my sex no small sum, and besides, disgusted as I now was with everything, I had become extremely indifferent. I wore what I was given to wear, and provided it was clean, every dress appealed to me. Fashions years out of date, cheap fabrics, they still existed then, everything suited me. So in regard to expenses, I was ideal. Father could not be persuaded to shift our residence to Reggio Calabria. I thus went back to Florence. I would be telling a big lie if I said that I went there willingly. I was living an oasis of peace, to go back to guerrilla warfare, if not to outright war. And I knew it. In Reggio, I had had afflictions, indeed the affliction of afflictions, but I was so surrounded by love that this helped me to endure the new thunderbolt. Nothing is more wearisome, demoralizing, or consuming than the little daily pricks we must cope with when we live alongside certain characters. These pricks are not real wounds, but prove more exhausting than a real, deep wound. They are like the bites of swarms of mosquitoes which, constantly renewing themselves, fall upon our flesh and pinch, nip, suck, irritate, and inject infinitesimal droplets of venom, unable to kill if introduced separately, but depositing germs causing fever, which can kill. Those bites do not visibly tear the flesh, but turn it into a swollen, sore mask. They are exasperating, taking the joy out of sleep, disturbing one's afternoon nap, obstructing reading, a scourge, small in its instruments, but large in its effects. I was going to meet this scourge, leaving the peace in which I had lived, the understanding I had received, and the affection which had acted as a medicine for me. In spite of what I had suffered on being abandoned by Mario, I was once again blooming. I had been thriving anew since August. Under the beneficent shock of joy, my youth had been fortified, and a kind of physical resurrection had taken place. Happiness and love can do so much in someone previously bereft of them. With that new pain thrown into the bargain, either because God had now gathered in my poor soul, which was about to be dealt the final blow of sorrow, or because all those harmonious physical laws constituting the human organism's daily defense, which had previously been languishing in soporose exhaustion, had now been newly set in motion. Whatever the reason was, I had passed the very painful test in good physical condition. My cousins, most affectionate and proud of my well-being, which they rightly attributed to the abundant acts of attention they had lavished upon me, did not want to let me leave, but I certainly could not continue far from my home. I was stung by the desire to return to my family. First of all, for the sake of Father, whose life I very easily imagined to be wretched, and also because, in spite of everything, I have always loved and still love Mother, a love which knows it will never be returned, but which does not diminish for this reason. I well know that my mother, affected as she is by a persecution complex, is convinced that I have never loved her, but I also know doubly well how much I have loved her, with a love which not even her acts of harshness have wearied or decreased. One day, when Mother, too, has risen to the light of God, something which, at the price of my holocaust, I have requested and still request for her, and I feel this is a much more effective love than one based on simpering and little kisses. One day, when from that light mother understands the truth of things, then she will finally comprehend the love with which her misunderstood daughter loved her. Well, it does not matter if my daughterly affection is unappreciated. I am thus deprived of the enjoyment which might come to me therefrom, and my affection has a double merit. I returned then to Florence. It was August 2nd, 1922. Our Lady of the Angels, Our Lady of Forgiveness of Assisi, was my patron for this return, which was a great forgiveness, and the angels must have helped me to overcome the first encounter with the woman who had taken everything from me. I think the most diligent among them was the angel who comforted the Mother of Christ in the cenacle while he was being betrayed by a kiss, denied by Peter, offended by those he had benefited, tortured, derided. The angel of the desolate one among desolate women, the angel of Gethsemane and Calvary, the angel who moved to and fro between the Mother and the Son, the angel who gathered the drops of divine blood and tears of the Mother of Jesus, was singing to me the hymn of forgiveness for those who have crucified us, pointing out to me the crown of thorns, the torturing nails, the scourges, the cross, the lance, and the sponge, which, as they had been for the Saviour, the Lamb, were to be poor Maria's weapons of sacrifice and glory. I found Father quite run down in health, gaunt, wan, he who had always been so light-skinned and ruddy. Mother was also very run down, in spite of the fact that she had constantly had the help of the woman who, of course, disappeared on my arrival. My cousin Clotilde and Memo, who had accompanied me to Florence, made a last attempt to persuade Father to leave with them for Calabria within a month. But Father, with the stubbornness left by certain illnesses, utterly refused. My cousins thus left, and I remained. The suffocating heat of Florence, truly unbearable for me, accustomed to the light, airy atmosphere of the Messina Straits, the narrowness of the burning apartment, painful to me, habituated as I was to the open air of the large hotel, the memories crowding together to prick my soul, and the, shall we say, benign questions of the purveyors, neighbors, and others, who more or less openly asked me what I had done, done with the child. Some questioned me point blank, at once occasioned me no small suffering, and my heart began to dance its frenzied tarantella, which had calmed down for some months. I immediately lost weight, but one must be patient. In the first days, as long as there was a danger that Clotilde might come back, even Mother was gentle. Later, once the threat had passed, she showed her claws, or rather, talons. She wanted to ask questions and make insinuations. I imposed silence on her so energetically, my only energy, that she did not dare raise the topic for years and years. She must have thought I knew exactly what she had done. If not, she would not have yielded so readily. The second act of force always set upon the idea that being a governess or teacher was the quintessence of beauty. She wanted to turn me into a governess and sent me to Berlitz, the language school. I went because I have always liked to study and was pleased to refresh my French classes. But dashes to the markets, cleaning house, study, and dashes off to school, scares over the popular uprisings which were raging at that time, my heart skipping a beat over running into the colonel, and much more, made me so ill that I had to stop. Farewell to my mother's dream of making me a governess. Then another caprice. She sent me to the milliner's school, hoping to turn me into a fashion instructor or a dressmaker. I went, thinking it might be useful to tailor those frocks I wore. They were real frocks, without charm, but I was not keen on being charming. That's it. I'd like to know Mother's real purpose in wanting to persuade people that I had such a need to earn my living that I had to become either a governess or a dressmaker. I have never found out exactly, but there was a hidden purpose. I had no need. You can understand that if after 10 years of illness I am not yet like Job, it is a sign that our finance is really worse that we're not so paltry. We are now reaching the tether's end, it's true, but we've been living this way for 10 years. Previously our income was more than sufficient to live well, and there was even a surplus. But Mother wanted to persuade someone that I was a poor girl without means. Who was this someone? I have always thought it was Mario and his relatives. Who knows what she had said in that calamitous letter? Now she had to corroborate her words. I think she may have said I had to maintain them in their old age. So many things occur to me. I think she may have said I had become engaged to another man, rolling in money. I think she may have said that I had lost my head and my honesty. I think she may have said I had a shameful illness. Ever so many things occur to me. I know my mother and realize that, just to satisfy her whim, she is capable of inventing anything. It does not matter if another's good name goes up in smoke. It does not matter if people criticize and speculate on the whole family. Nothing matters, provided she wins.